So when we were hit with this project, we wanted to know, okay, what are the current problems going on in Puerto Rico? And we've seen that Puerto Rico is heavily dependent on cars. There's a ton of highways in Puerto Rico, and all of these different things that combat transit use. But what can increase ridership? And so as we're looking at these solutions, obviously we've already heard solutions displayed like BRT, which is bus rapid transit, or TOD, which is transit-oriented development, or just like having shorter commute times where we can get to a destination quicker. All of these different things and all of these different solutions, but how can we get there? And it first starts with trust. The people of San Juan, the people of Puerto Rico, the people who use the transit system must first trust AUTI to deliver on the jobs that they say they will be done. And so this is what our RFP is about. Just simply, how can we take that first initial step of letting the people and creating confidence in the people that AUTI will get the job done. And so that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so continuing off of what Rivas just said, the specific purpose of this document is to obtain some solutions and recommendations to develop the ridership growth plan. And this includes a lot of different factors, identifying the barriers to transit use, figuring out where friction can be limited, reconstructing the existing structures that can be reused to eliminate friction and transfers, a system or a plan that will prioritize safety and comfort for the riders. And many of these points have been reassured from our fieldwork this week, making sure that it's accessible across populations that have been underserved, establishing measurable performance targets, and a plan that will provide a roadmap to implement these changes. And this goes into the scope of work. Through our research in best practices through similar MPOs to San Juan, we looked at some case studies in New Orleans and Orlando to make this list some components that we believe is most relevant to the situation here in San Juan. And these are what we require on the contract end, a understanding of the current travel demand analysis to have a baseline of compare these changes and identify where ridership has the most potential to change, an understanding of the social and economic impacts of transit, who the dependent populations are, and what changes are necessary to make ridership more accessible to them. And of course, in the face of events such as hurricanes, having an emergency protocol plan in place and disaster resiliency in the pre-planning process to avoid disruption later on. And I'm going to pass on to Issa to go through the following.
Yes. In addition to the disaster resiliency, there's also a hazard mitigation and action plan to make sure that even these small day-to-day interruptions are something that are easily addressed, or that there's a plan to be willing to address them and make those things public. On the next component, the service and operational strategies, this works hand in hand with that, what I just mentioned. There need to be interventions in each IP service, of course, with a clear proper evaluation coming from the first component to understand what local and network-wide solutions need to happen, and more importantly, with each of these interventions, what their anticipated ridership impacts are. Many may not be extremely positive, but there are trade-offs with every specific intervention. So the contractor will be responsible for the general assessment and then these individual policy suggestions. 5, this is something we were really excited about, is the public engagement and stakeholder coordination. This is something that has been a recurring topic even in previous presentations today. So we make an emphasis that whoever the contractor is has to have a bilingual engagement plan in order to fully be in contact with the community, that they have to be in close communication and collaboration with businesses and neighborhoods, so these private-public relationships, and creating a conversation beyond just informing people. Yes, there needs to be a public education program, but there has to be a conversation going both ways in order to create an equitable, a long-term ridership plan. 6, the financial framework and implementation plan. This is in the interest of public accountability and also personal or internal direction. So there needs to be a proper way of public and private options, a cost breakdown of each of these options, and a payment schedule, both of the contractor and their allocation of funds toward each of their interventions, but also in where ACTI should be prioritizing their long-term goals. 7, the performance framework. There needs to, from what we know from the first component, there needs to use that as a baseline in order to create these performance metrics, create a feedback mechanism, and long-term data management and transfer plans. We understand that maybe that this contractual relationship has to come with an ability for long-term evaluation and public release of information so that academics, other people, other institutions can use it as well.
So now to delve into a supplemental document that we will be creating in conjunction with this request for proposal. This document will primarily serve its purpose to inform ACTI's decisions as they're evaluating potential contractors and clients. So we'll be going over this at a bit of a high level and not delving into too much detail as we continue to refine this document. But tentatively, this document will include our research on policy recommendations and best practices for ACTI as they move forward overall, including data sources and analysis that we've acquired from archival research and speaking to additional stakeholders. We've also been doing our own research in terms of observing the transit system here from our perspective and from the perspective of individuals that we've interviewed. So we'll be using information on current ridership status. Additionally, like I mentioned before, our fieldwork has included interviews. So we will include some summaries of these interviews, what our takeaways were of our understanding of the general public, academics, bankers, businesses, different people, and what their views are on this system. And overall, this is fieldwork that we've been doing since we've been in San Juan since this past weekend, and are continuing to do so today. And overall, this will kind of inform those documents that we have within the RFP in terms of deliverables and why specific deliverables may be most useful for at these purposes.
And lastly, ending, one thing we understand is that it takes time to develop a full solution. So I can't get to the top of the stairs without taking step 1. And so what we're understanding is that budget feasibility is one thing, infrastructure, capacity, all of these different things are massive when it comes to development. But if we don't take that first step, and if we don't show the people that first we're able to deliver on the promises that we made, we can't take those next steps. So what we're doing with our memo is like helping prepare ACTI next steps and saying, okay, this is something that is feasible, and this is something that can get done within a certain amount of months, so that the people will know that this is a place you can trust.
Well, thank you guys for the presentation. Muchas gracias a nuestro primer panel de viaje. Ahora continuamos con el segundo panel de los estudiantes, Nico Di Glosa, Brenda Parker, María Pilar.
So kind of the way that we've organized this presentation is in 5 parts. We're first going to give a description of our project, then the priorities of the agency, some best practices that we've presented, our fieldwork, and then
just kicking things off, our project is centered on establishing a sustainable fare structure for ACTI that manages to do a bit of a balancing act between maximizing ridership while also optimizing eligibility for federal funds through Section 5307. To get there, we used an approach of elasticity mapping to match national trends with San Juan specific demographics, and then we did income scale fare benchmarking to see how ACTI compares to peer U.S. agencies. And then, of course, we also did a direct fieldwork to capture the actual sentiment of people using these systems every day. Before we dive in further though, let's look at the current network. ATI operates all across the metro area, and as we return to pay transit, we are starting from the pre-2024 baseline, which you see up there on the left. Historically, those fares were $150 for the Tren Urbano, $2 for the Metro Urbano Express Bus, and then 75 cents for local AMA for Metro Bus. Our job is to determine if returning to these fares still makes sense in the current climate, or if adjustments need to be made.
So when proposing a fare, we wanted to consider the two top priorities of the transit agency. The first is to maintain the high levels of ridership that they gained from the fare-free period, and the second being to maximize federal funding. As you can see in the graphs on the right side, ATI is hugely reliant on federal funding in comparison to other U.S. transit agencies. We compared it to Atlanta's agency, MARTA, and so the presence of a lot of gray in the graph shows a huge reliance on federal funding, so it's important to maximize that as well as keep high levels of riders. So we identified 3 best practices in terms of setting fares. These practices came from looking at the way other transit agencies within the United States have structured fares. The first is to keep fares low to retain price elastic riders. The second is to prioritize using fare revenue to improve service. And the third is to use service improvements to maximize federal funding. So the first practice, like I said, keep fares low, retain fare elastic riders. So elasticity is basically percentage change in demand to a percentage change in price of anything. And so we can see in the chart on the right, you can see by increasing fares by 10%, you are seeing decreases in ridership. And then the groups that are in bold are the demographic groups that are most affected by changes in prices. The second practice would be to use fare revenue to actually improve service. Different agencies across the United States have improved service and have seen significant increases in ridership. So this could be another practice to target that first goal. And this graph just kind of shows the importance of service improvement. We see that in 2011, when service was reduced to 50% of original levels, we're seeing a huge drop in ridership and we have not made up for that in the increases in ridership that we've seen since the start of the fare-free period. So overall, quality of service is hugely important to maintaining ridership. And then thirdly, in terms of maximizing federal funding, we recommend to increase coverage and frequency, as well as increasing passenger miles. So ridership and expanding the quality of service could work to secure more of those 5307 funding. That's really important. And these are just some of the quick formulas of how those 5307 funds are calculated, but Nico's going to go into the comparisons between different transit agencies.
So as we mentioned, we did research based on the literature on what things make ridership grow, but we also wanted to get a baseline referencing U.S. transit systems that are similar to San Juan, what their fare prices are, what their characteristics are, and to see what about what the fares should be for us. So we looked at different cities in the U.S. based on like the size of their system, their ridership, their population, like stuff like median income, vehicle ownership, things that are relevant to transit. And we came up with a big database of similar systems. So for example, these are some of those. For heavy rail, we found similarities with Cleveland in Ohio, also Honolulu in Hawaii. For the bus, we saw similarities in El Paso, Texas, and so on. So what we did was we scaled their fares based on their median incomes down to San Juan's median incomes. So for example, in Cleveland, the text is small, but the fare is $2.50, but that is with their median income of about $70,000. So if, for example, someone from San Juan were to move to Cleveland and then suddenly make more money,
paying that $250 would feel as if they were paying only 95 cents for the train urbana here. So we did that comparison for all the different modes. And so now we can see the comparison between the different modes by ATI and then also in the rest of the US. And we can see that consistently, well, at least for heavy rail, train urbana, and local bus, San Juan riders tend to pay about 50% more as a proportion of their income than other cities in the US. So that was another consideration that we had in terms of our research. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to Brendan, where we talk about our fieldwork, where we talk to San Juan riders in specific.
That's me. So for our field work, we did surveys of riders. We spent time at major train urbana station and AMA stations, including Sagrado Corazon, Monterrey, Universidad, Coupe, and Bayamon. We conducted 32 interviews with active riders, and we timed these surveys for the afternoon hours, in between around 4 to 6 p.m., specifically to capture regular commuters who were taking the train every day or bus every day who are most impacted by fare changes. And the time survey, the core of the interview was something called a stated preference survey. So each respondent was given 4 pairs of cards. On the right, you see an example of one of them. We had 2 for the train and 2 for the bus, and we asked them which option they preferred between the 2, as you can see on the right. By forcing riders to choose between options like, a $1.25 fare with a transfer versus, 25 cents more for a direct trip. We were able to measure exactly how they trade off what they value in terms of frequency and travel time and the service, the quality of the service they're being provided. And beyond the stated preference surveys, you see another one on the left that's bus instead of train. But we also collected socioeconomic indicators to get a more accurate profile of the rider base that's using the train every day. And we use vehicle ownership as a proxy for transit dependency and fare elasticity. We also asked for zip codes, which is a bit of a non-intrusive way to use a rough proxy to estimate income based on neighborhood, which let us see if higher poverty areas had different opinions or reacted differently to our proposed price points, or had different things in their trade-offs. So after that, what did it all tell us? The results kind of revealed a bit of a split in priorities for bus riders. Better service was actually more important than cheaper fares a lot of the times. And this was especially true among older and wealthier riders who were willing to pay more if it meant fixing long wait times. However, though, for the train, riders tended to prefer cheaper fares over better service. Their main complaint kind of centered on having to transfer to a bus, which in our view kind of suggests that they see trains as being held back by the bus system's reliability.
So taking into account our fieldwork, our literature review of best practices, and also our review of similar cities in the US, we came up with this fare proposal. So as you notice, generally we propose an overall reduction in the fares. If the main goal of ATI is to increase ridership, we saw that when ATI removed the fares, there was a very big increase in ridership. So if we want to retain that, one way to do that would be to keep the fares lower than they were before. But you can also see that the reductions are different across different modes. Or actually before that, if you remember from the comparison to the other cities, these are still higher than those other cities. Because as we found in our research, it's still important to fund service improvements. And we can't have those improvements if we don't have the revenue to fund all of that. So we still need to make a little bit more money to get the stronger ridership boosts from the service quality. And then again, there's different reductions for different fares because as we saw, people using the train, they value the price a little more. a lot of people on the bus are okay with the price. So bigger decreases for the train than there are for the bus. You might be thinking, like, we are 3 students from the US, not from Puerto Rico. Like, what do we know about how well these fares would work out? So there's a way for you to check like whether these fares are actually good. So using the elasticity, there's a formula where you can take the price change, the fares, and calculate the changes in ridership. So if we lower the fares, we'll increase the ridership by how much? We use math to find out. And then also there's the Federal Transit Administration's 5307 grants are based on a formula, which has ridership as one of its factors. So using that formula, use the increase in ridership, and then find out how much more in incentive funds get. But also, you can use the change in ridership and the change in fares to find the change in revenue. And overall, the federal funds, the total revenue, allow ATI to make those service improvements to increase ridership by bigger numbers in the long term. So it's kind of a balancing act between if you lower the fares too much, you won't get as much total revenue. But if you keep the fares too high, then you will get the incentive funds. If you raise the fares too high, then you'll have lots of revenue, but you won't have as much FTA funds. So using these formulas, we can create a simulation, which we are trying to do after this, to find exactly where that balancing point is to maximize not only ridership, but also the overall money that ATI has. And then also, as we know, there is a political element to changing the fares. It's not only about the math. So it's important that we talk to different stakeholders, talk to different marginalized groups, for example, because they are a little more vulnerable to changes in money in terms of like livability, affordability. So all this to say, we are looking forward to actually doing the simulation, doing more research on like the political situation and also the effects of equity and all these other non-math things. But yes, for our part, which is about the fares and the math, this is what we have.